For over 70 years, North Korea has been ruled by the Kim dynasty. Despite the reality of his regime, which is one of the most ruthless and tyrannical the world has ever known. And yet, the Kim family are considered in North Korea as the living gods. It all begins with the country's founding leader, Kim Il-sung, who North Koreans believe lead them to victory over Japan in World War II and America in the Korean War. When he died of a heart attack in 1994, his eldest son, Kim Jong-il, inherited the mantle of power. This marked the beginning of the world's first communist dynasty that would rule North Korea for many decades to come. The Kim family has maintained its grip on power through fear, propaganda, and violence. But when Kim Jong-il died in 2011, many in the West hoped his death could potentially be a turning point in the history of the country. But inside this secretive regime, a dictator was already born. Kim Jong-un, the third son of Kim Jong-il, who was only 27 years old at the time, takes his father's place. But how can one family shape the future of more than 20 million people for 7 long decades and yet be worshipped as the living gods? Yet the lingering question isn't just about the house of cards that the Kim family has built, but how did the Kim dynasty come to power in the first place? Today, we are going on a journey to uncover the untold truth about the rise of the Kim dynasty and expose the hidden world of the Hermit Kingdom. So sit tight because this is going to be a wild ride. In 1910, Japan's ambition extended to the Korean peninsula as they planned to gain a strategic edge against their rivals, China and Russia. This occupation marked the beginning of decades of enduring hardship for the Korean people. The Japanese aimed to make Korea part of their growing empire, and they did so with ruthless suppression of the Korean language and culture. And those who dared to resist faced brutal consequences. However, 2 years into the occupation, an extraordinary event was about to unfold in a village just outside the city of Pyongyang. It was the birth of Kim Il-sung, who will go on to rule North Korea for decades to come. In 1912, Kim Il-sung was born. His parents, despite their humble background, recognized his potential for greatness even from an early age and gave him the name Kim Sun-jung, which means pillar of the country. However, an incident that would deeply influence Kim's life was about to occur. Kim's father joined a local resistance movement against Japanese oppression and was arrested alongside his fellow protesters. They were subjected to merciless torture. This simple event marked the beginning of an end to the decade of suffering of the Korean people under Japanese oppression and motivated Kim to dedicate his life to his parents' cause. As a young man, Kim became deeply involved in the anti-Japanese resistance movement. In the 1930s, he joined a guerrilla group fighting against the Japanese and quickly rose through the ranks. His remarkable bravery and daring leadership skills led his fellow revolutionaries to rename him to Kim Il-sung, which means Kim becomes the sun. Kim embraces the name, and he becomes convinced that he is not like other men. In 1941, he led his forces in a raid on the Japanese garrison town of Pocheonbo, which is now recognized as the founding event of the North Korean military. However, when the Japanese crushed the guerrilla movement, Kim was forced to flee and take refuge in the Soviet Union. The Soviets were impressed by Kim's remarkable skills and bravery and entrusted him with leading about 160 guerrilla fighters, continuing their communist resistance struggle in far eastern Russia. Then came a pivotal event that would take Kim Il-sung to absolute power: World War II. As the Allies crushed Hitler's armies in Germany, Japan was forced to surrender in 1945, after America had brought the country to its knees. It seemed that Kim's dream of liberating Korea from Japanese occupation was coming true, but a new challenge was on the horizon. With the Americans in control of the South and the Soviets supporting Kim Il-sung in the North, Korea became divided. In February 1946, the Soviet Union established Kim Il-sung as the leader of the Provisional People's Committee of North Korea. He began expanding his forces from just 200 guerrilla fighters to over 60,000 soldiers. Kim Il-sung was a skilled politician and mastered the art of propaganda, having learned much from the Soviet leader, Joseph Stalin. He quickly consolidated his power and initiated the establishment of a totalitarian state based on the principles of juche, or self-reliance. He also created a cult of personality around himself, depicting him as the savior of the Korean people. In 1948, Kim Il-sung declared the establishment of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or North Korea. He became the country's first premier and quickly began to implement his policies of juche and militarism. Kim's new objective was the unification of Korea, and he doubled his army's size to 120,000, outnumbering the South Koreans 2-1. At dawn on June 25, 1950, he began one of the most brutal conflicts of the 20th century, the Korean War, a conflict that came as close to a Third World War as we've ever seen.
이 불국주의자들이 친일파 민족 반역자들이 지지하에서 우리 3천만 민족을 분열하고 우리 조국의 강토를 자기네의 식민지로 만들려고 활동하는 데 있으니 우리 조국에는 위기가 닥쳐왔으니
The Korean War erupted with a startling surprise. On June 25, 1950, North Korea launched a sudden invasion of the South, marking the beginning of the Korean conflict that originated from the division of the Korean Peninsula in 1945. North Korea's leader, Kim Il-sung, was determined to unify the Korean Peninsula under communist rule. He viewed the South Korean government as a puppet of the United States and a direct threat to his own regime. Misjudging the situation, Kim Il-sung believed the United States would not interfere if he invaded the South. However, his assumption proved to be a colossal miscalculation. The United States and its allies, including the United Nations, stepped in to support South Korea. The Korean War started as a brutal and bloody conflict, lasting for 3 grueling years. In the very beginning of the war, the North Korean army quickly overwhelmed the South Korean forces, capturing most of the country and pushing them into a small corner of the country. Kim Il-sung believed his dream of a unified Korea was about to come true. But the intervention of the United States and its allies shifted the tide of the war. The American-led United Nations Army carried out a daring counterattack and pushed back the North Korean forces to a small corner in the north. Desperate for help, Kim turned to his communist neighbor China and convinced its supreme leader, Mao Zedong, to support his communist cause. Mao agreed to support Kim Il-sung's North Korea and send in more than 250,000 troops across the Amnok River into North Korea and push the US troops back towards the 38th parallel. By the close of 1950, the war had evolved into a stalemate, with both sides fighting with brutal new tactics along a line near the 38th parallel, the same line that had divided the Korean peninsula before the war. Both sides suffered heavy casualties, and in 1951, peace talks began to take place between the two rivals. Yet these talks would drag on for 2 years as the two sides struggled to agree on multiple issues, including the demarcation between North and South Korea. Finally, in July 1953, almost 3 years after the invasion, the war ended in a stalemate as an armistice was signed, bringing an end to the Korean War. However, no peace treaty has ever been signed, and the two Koreas remain technically at war to this day. The outcome of the Korean War was the division of the Korean Peninsula into 2 separate nations, North Korea and South Korea. Both sides agreed to a demilitarized zone, or the DMZ, which separated the two countries to this day. A 4-kilometer wide, 120-kilometer long stretch of uninhabited countryside. The DMZ is actually the most heavily guarded border in the world. And yet, just a few years after the establishment of the DMZ, Americans, South Koreans, and North Korean troops find themselves in an ugly confrontation. With the war and the DMZ isolating the country, North Korea decides to pursue a new path. To ensure that North Korea would never be vulnerable to invasion again, Kim Il-sung set out to build a vast million-man army. He declared that North Korea must become entirely self-sufficient and not rely on its communist allies China or Russia for help. In 1955, he introduced a policy known as juche, which meant North Korea would strive for total self-reliance. This policy combined his political ideology with aspects of the Marxism-Leninism political manifesto. However, the juche ideology concealed a much darker motive. It was his tool of indoctrination. Under the juche ideology, North Korea aimed to produce its own food, arm itself, and develop independently from the rest of the world. In his quest to control every aspect of his people's lives, Kim established one of the most ruthless and tyrannical regimes the world has ever seen. The Juche policy provided him with the opportunity to establish a one-man rule over the country. He was determined to eliminate all his political enemies. As a result, Kim Il-sung became the supreme leader of North Korea, and the masses were expected to submit to the great leader. Those who dared to oppose the system faced severe consequences. In less than 4 years, over 2,500 suspected political opponents were arrested, tortured, imprisoned, or even executed. In order to control his people's thoughts and ensure the long-term survival of his regime, Kim developed an extensive propaganda machine. He attempted to completely isolate the country from outside influence and lock down all media and information sources. The population was forced to listen to a single radio channel that operated all day long, broadcasting only praise for Kim Il-sung. The purpose was to ensure the utmost loyalty of the masses to the regime. To oversee this vast propaganda apparatus, he entrusted his eldest son, Kim Jong-il, with running the entire propaganda department. But Kim Il-sung had much bigger plans for the young Kim Jong-il. To guarantee the regime's survival after his death, Kim Il-sung portrayed himself as a godlike figure who had won the Korean War. With the help of his son, Kim Jong-il, Kim Il-sung's image and stature were prominently displayed throughout North Korea, and the people were indoctrinated to worship him almost like a god. Kim believed that the only way to secure the regime's future was through succession, even though it had never been done before in the communist world. To ensure that his decision to transfer ultimate power to his son would go unquestioned, he began to craft a new image for the young Kim. He established a narrative of superiority for the young Kim and created a different story about Kim Jong-il's birth. It was a story that would give him a godlike right to rule over the North Korean people. The official state report claimed he was born in circumstances that would make even Jesus blush. Although the story was designed to portray Kim Jong-il as superior, but it's only what you could expect from a man raised to be a dictator. From the very beginning, Kim Jong-il's life was built on a web of lies. He was reportedly born on Mount Paektu, the most famous mountain in Korea, granting him the godlike right his father desired. The official narrative depicted his birth as extraordinary: a cracked glacier on Mount Paektu, a double rainbow in the sky, a new star in the heavens, and cranes, the national birds of Korea, circling above to announce Kim Jong-il's birth. But in reality, he was born in a Siberian village during World War II. During the 1970s, over 34,000 monuments were erected in their names, accompanied by countless pieces of art and films glorifying Kim and his family. As a result, they are now considered gods in North Korea. Satisfied with the succession, Kim Il-sung stepped back, placing Kim Jong-il in a heavily militarized North Korea. To ensure that nobody among the ruling elite questioned his youth and inexperience, Kim Jong-il was entrusted with running the North Korean intelligence service. With his son now managing the government, Kim Il-sung returned to his hometown. Kim Il-sung projected his life to last 120 years and established a longevity research institute with the sole mission of keeping him alive. However, even Kim Il-sung could not escape his own death. In 1994, North Korea's founding leader Kim Il-sung passed away at the age of 82. With his death, the world's first communist dynasty was born, as his son Kim Jong-il took the helm. Kim Jong-il had held various key positions within the government and military, and was already a well-known figure in North Korea. But Kim Jong-il inherited a challenging situation. Despite his father's attempts at total self-sufficiency, North Korea had become reliant on its communist neighbor for goods. And when the Soviet Union collapses in 1991, it had a catastrophic effect on the North Korean economy, compounded by several disastrous harvests that left people across the country starving. Kim Jong-il, while perpetuating the personality cult established by his father, implemented his own policies. He toured the country and claimed to survive on just boiled rice a day, emphasizing his sacrifice for the people. He even claimed that he ate so little that he no longer needed to use the bathroom as his body had adapted to function without excess fuel. Under his propaganda, farming was portrayed as a resounding success, and everyone was mobilized to work, including their new leader, Kim Jong-il. Before long, he was revered as the dear leader. But the reality is, while his people are starving, Kim Jong-il is living the high life. A Russian envoy who traveled with him in his famous train during his trip to Moscow back in 2001 said that roast donkey and fresh lobsters were flown to the train every day. Kim ate the food with silver chopsticks and washed it down with French wine and champagne, and he was said to be one of the biggest buyers of Hennessy cognac in the world. Within the Kim family and regime, power dynamics remained enigmatic, but one fact was clear. Kim Jong-il during his rule was the sole decision maker, maintaining his grip on power through fear, propaganda, and force. Dissent was ruthlessly suppressed, rivals were purged, and a vast network of spies and informants was established. Under Kim Jong-il's dictatorship, he immersed absolute control over North Korea, extending his reach beyond the government and military to the economy, media, and arts. North Korea became the most isolated country in the world due to repression, economic hardship, and famine. Resources were funneled into the military and his extravagant lifestyle, while the North Korean people suffered immensely. Then he goes further. He began developing nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles, posing a significant threat to global security. And through clever nuclear brinkmanship, Kim Jong-il gets his most hated enemy to bail him out. The United States sends food aids to feed his people. In exchange, Kim Jong-il will give up his nuclear programs. The state propaganda revealed that the food is a reparation from the Americans on their imperialistic attack on the North Korean people in the Korean War. And when the food came in, Kim Jong-il continued to develop his nuclear program. It's his way of sending a clear message to the world that he isn't unstable enough to fire a nuclear missile at any country that threatens his national security. On the international stage, Kim Jong-il's nuclear threat doesn't just get the world to feed his people, but it makes the world notice him. His country is regarded as irrelevant in world affairs, but now that he feels like he is making America subdominant to him, it's enough to get him noticed. And it feeds his ego. In the secretive world of North Korea, the regime wielded power by suppressing information and stifling dissent. It maintained one of the world's most restrictive media environments, using a blend of propaganda and censorship to carefully craft the reality perceived by its citizens. In this tightly controlled society, North Koreans were exposed only to government-approved information, with foreign websites and broadcasts blocked and domestic media content extremely regulated. The regime's extensive network of spies and informants kept a watchful eye on the population, ready to report any hint of dissent. Those who dared to criticize the government or its leaders faced severe consequences, including imprisonment, torture, or even execution. These first-hand accounts revealed a nation marked by poverty, fear, and constant surveillance. But thanks to the courage of defectors, escapees, and journalists who risked everything to expose the dark secrets of the regime, the world now sees the harsh reality of Kim's rule and the dark nature of life in North Korea. Shin Dong-hyuk was born and raised in Camp 14, a North Korean political prison camp. His childhood was destroyed by torture, starvation, and the horrifying execution of his mother and brother. In a daring escape in 2005, Shin managed to break free, becoming a leading advocate for human rights in North Korea. Hyun Seo Lee, a privileged North Korean who grew up in Pyongyang, witnessed the poverty and suffering of her fellow citizens, leading her to defect in 2007. She crossed the frozen Amnok River to reach China, and from China to South Korea, and she has since become a vocal critic of the North Korean regime. We've made a full video about Hyun Seo Lee's daring escape. Make sure you check it out to see how it happens. Ji-yeon Hwang, a North Korean soldier who defected in 2002, has spoken out about the brutality of the North Korean military and the regime's use of child soldiers. Her mission is to raise awareness of the human rights situation in North Korea. The North Korean regime's reliance on propaganda and personality cults was its way of maintaining power. But Kim Jong-il's reign as North Korea's dear leader brings the country to its knees. Around 1 million people starved to death in one of the world's worst famines of the 20th century. Unfortunately, for the North Korean people, an already impoverished and repressed life is about to get even worse. In 2008, Kim Jong-il disappeared without explanation. For nearly 10 months, the world awaited answers about Kim Jong-il's situation. But when he reappeared, he looked different, and then came the final blow. On December 17, 2011, the news was announced. Kim Jong-il, North Korea's dear leader, was dead. This time, many in the West hoped his death could potentially be a turning point in the history of the country. North Koreans have never known real political freedom in their history for the past 600 years. They were ruled either by absolute Korean monarchs or Japanese emperors. Now, after 63 years of brutal dictatorship, there was a chance that the self-imposed exile as the Hermit Kingdom would open up to the rest of the world. Rumors of reunification surfaced, and the hope grew further when it was announced that Kim Jong-il's third son, who was exposed to the outside world and educated in the West, would take over. Finally, at just 27 years old, Kim Jong-il's third son, Kim Jong-un, became the dynasty's third supreme leader. Despite his age, Kim Jong-un was now at the helm of one of the world's most secretive and oppressive regimes. He took the reins of the Korean Workers' Party and the North Korean military. And for someone with very little experience, the world watched intently to see how he could command the world's fourth largest military, armed with nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. Many feared his youth and inexperience might result in instability and unpredictability, continuing the legacy of repression and militarism. The thought of such power being wielded by a young and relatively untested leader is truly terrifying. Unfortunately for North Korea, he turned out to be even more ruthless than his father. He started by purging his own uncle, who was publicly arrested and shot to death. Then he went to public executions, executing many of his military commanders. He continued to develop and test nuclear weapons while his people starved. But it's only what you could expect from a man born to be a dictator. Kim Jong-un was born on January 8, 1982. He is the second of 3 children of the North Korean dear leader Kim Jong-il. He attended a regular public school in Bern, Switzerland, described as shy and a very good student who got along well with his classmates and was a basketball fan. But at the age of 17, he moved back to North Korea. Within the decade, he would be inaugurated as the supreme leader of North Korea. Kim Jong-un continued to run the country under the policies of his father since taking power. He advanced North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missile programs, issuing threats to use nuclear weapons against his rivals if they threatened him. But there is a far darker side to the new Kim. In 2017, Kim Jong-un returned to his family business. Now it was time for him to deal with his half-brother Kim Jong-nam. Kim believed that Jong-nam had become a CIA agent, sharing information about him and his kingdom with their most hated enemy, the United States. Kim Jong-nam was born in 1971 as the son of Kim Jong-il and his mistress Song Hye-rim, and was once considered the heir apparent to his father's leadership. But he fell out of favor with the regime in the late 1990s. On 13th of February 2017, Kim Jong-nam met his death at Kuala Lumpur International Airport in Malaysia. His death was the result of a heinous act, as he was poisoned with VX nerve agent, a deadly chemical weapon. The perpetrators of this horrifying act were 2 women, Indonesian, Siti Aisyah, and Vietnamese, Doan Thi Huong, who were subsequently arrested for his murder. The women claimed that they believed they were part of a prank for a reality TV show, tricked into an unspeakable crime. However, Malaysian prosecutors held a different belief, suspecting that they acted on the orders of the North Korean government. The event unfolded as Kim Jong-nam waited for his flight to Macau. 2 women approached him presenting what seemed to be an innocent request for participation in a reality TV show prank. Little did he know that the substance applied to his face, which he assumed was harmless, concealed the lethal VX nerve agent. As the poison took its toll, Kim Jong-nam felt dizzy and nauseous. Seeking help, he rushed to the airport clinic, but it was too late. His life was extinguished shortly after his arrival. The North Korean government quickly denied any involvement in the assassination of Kim Jong-nam. Yet, experts worldwide suspect the hand of North Korean agents in this terrible crime. The 2 women arrested for the murder were ultimately acquitted and released from prison in 2019. They were deported to their home countries, leaving many questions unanswered. Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-nam's half-brother and North Korea's leader, has never faced charges related to his brother's assassination. It remains unlikely that he will ever be held accountable for his role in this tragic event. The assassination of Kim Jong-nam cast a harrowing light on the North Korean regime's brutality. It demonstrated that Kim Jong-un is prepared to eliminate even his own family members to secure his grip on power. The consequences of the assassination extended beyond the tragic loss of life. It strained North Korea's relations with Malaysia, leading to the severance of diplomatic ties in 2017. In the aftermath of this shocking and tragic event, questions linger about North Korea's future leadership. It remains unclear who will succeed Kim Jong-un. However, one certainty is that the nation will continue under the shadow of a repressive and authoritarian regime for the foreseeable future. North Korea remains a highly isolated and unpredictable nation. While it maintains close ties with China, its relationships with the United States, South Korea, and Japan have experienced considerable strain. Its nuclear capabilities, particularly the capacity to target the United States, have established it as a paramount security concern for the US and its allies. North Korea's track record in human rights is deeply troubling, with allegations of crimes against humanity such as forced labor, torture, and public executions. The future of North Korea remains in uncertainty. The nation faces a multitude of challenges, including economic sanctions, a growing food crisis, and a humanitarian emergency. But the timeline for how long the North Korean regime can sustain its grip on power remains unpredictable. And even though it is more invulnerable than ever before, some believe that this ruthless and tyrannical regime the Kim family have built could yet come crashing down. But one thing will remain clear: North Korea will continue to pose a significant threat to the international community in the years to come. If you want to learn more about Hyun Seo Lee's daring escape from North Korea, click this video here. But for now, all that's left for us to say is thank you for watching ABN TV Global. You are the true heroes, and we will see you in the next video.